So the message this morning comes from Psalm 131. We're going to read that psalm. Psalm 131, a song of ascents of David. This is God's word. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. This is God's word. Brothers and sisters, loved in Christ, we're entering into the story after something has happened. You need to see that. We don't know what it was, but David is speaking from the other side of a crisis. He's come to a place where he's found a peace that settles his soul, but he had to go through something to get there. And as he describes it to God and as he tells us about it, we want to follow him there. We want to follow him as he gets there and what he does when he's there. And we're going to see three things. And the first thing we're going to see is that the crisis that he went through had to do with how he interacted with what was happening around him. What was going, all these unsettling concerns that were going on around him, and his desire to control them. You look at verse 1. If you got a Bible with you, take a look. We're just going to kind of walk through this passage here. But verse 1, you can see it. It's very clear, especially in the Hebrew. There's three things happening here. His heart, his eyes, and literally his walk. It's translated as, I don't concern myself. But literally it's, I don't walk around in. What he's saying is my heart, and the Hebrew word for heart can also mean the mind. It's not just an emotional thing. He says my heart is not lifted up. My heart is not up high. My eyes are not raised too high. And my walking about is not in things too great and marvelous for me. I don't get caught up. I don't concern myself in things that are above me. Now, there's two ways to read this, right? On the one hand, it can be about pride. What David's saying is he's talking about being proud, the heart. He's talking about being arrogant, the eyes, right? And then, in a way, you could say ignorant. Walking around in stuff you don't have a right to be walking around in, acting like you own the place, getting involved in stuff, meddling, whatever. It's pride. Somebody thinks too much of themselves. Heart, eyes, walk. But it seems that there's more going on here, that David's not just talking about a lesson that he learned, a crisis he went through that had to do with pride. As important as that is, it's a lesson, it's something to be learned, but he's looking a little deeper. He's the walking around, that last one, that being occupied, is about things that are great and wonderful. Not things that are great or too complicated. It's typically things that refer to the things of God. Like too wonderful, Psalm 139, for fearfully and wonderfully I am made. Right? It's wonderful. He's engaging not in things that are really difficult, things he doesn't have a right. No, it's things of God. David is talking about having a heart that is lifted up to things above him. Eyes that look into the clouds, eyes that try to peer into the unknowable. And then a occupying, a walking around in the things of God, things too great and too wonderful for him. Really worrying and being anxious and unsettled. There's lots of reasons for it. But sometimes it can happen when we try to get round to God's view of things. When our heart wants to be in the place where those big decisions are made, where our eyes are looking up there. Our actions are caught up in trying to impact things we can't possibly understand or meaningfully or helpfully direct. What I mean by this is, there's things that you can control. Like we typically call that things within your circle of control. You can control yourself. You can control, sort of your response to things. Psychologists, sociologists, counselors will use that language. But, how do you respond to what's right in front of you? We can do that. We can think about how we would respond, what we would like to do, what we would like to achieve. We can have concerns about that. But really, when you look at anxiety, when you look at worrying, and what gets your mind spinning and spiraling even, it's going to be something a little different than that, isn't it? Think about what makes you anxious and unsettled right now. Wanting to control what people think of you. Wanting to know what they think of you. Wanting people to love you, to like you, to respect you, to fear you, wanting their approval, their acceptance, wanting to control the choices people around you make and what they will do in the future. Maybe your friends, maybe in your family, maybe in your church, your community. Wanting to control whatever might impact your health, your finances, your future, your whatever, your grades, your job. Wanting to know what the future holds. You want to exert control. I really want this to happen. If only I could see, if only I could know what's going to happen. What can I do that will control the direction of what is happening? And it can be little things. I don't know, if you have it, sometimes I'll have it. I know y'all have it. You text somebody, and I don't know if it works for Android, so if you're off-brand, sorry, this is an Apple illustration, but you text somebody, and they get your text, and you're like, what are they going to say? And then the 3 dots appear, and you're like, oh, they've read it. They're responding. The dots are gone. Why aren't they responding? Did I say, is it something I said? What should I do? Should I do something about it? It can be little things, right? You're sitting there trying to micromanage all the little things that happen, and you're like, am I so caught up in all the things, my school friends, my work friends, my whatever. You get caught up in little things. It can be in your family, right? As parents, it's not that just you want your kids to do something, you want them to want to do it. I think that's the frustration. Have fun! How many times have you gone on an outing and one of the parents is like, we're having fun. I want to control your response to this. Not my own, I want to control yours. So there can be, but it can also be cultural. You look at the world around us and what you see is polarization. You see anxiety in our culture. People trying to change the world. Social media, likes, videos, whatever. You read sociologists looking at our culture. And they're telling us the future appears to be one of increasing polarization. There is no middle. We're being pushed to the extremes. You just see polarization. And what you see on the poles, on the opposite side, is anxiety and anger. People want to control the narrative. They want to control what's happening, and they feel like they don't have it, and they're getting angry. But when you really get down to it, it's deeply personal. It can be dark, and it can be crushing. I want my marriage. I want this for my marriage. I want this for my family. I want this for my children. I want my children to be happy. I want them to make good choices. I want them to love the Lord. I want this for my health. I want this for someone in my life's health. And I look at it and it's all gone wrong. There's brokenness, there's hurt. Why did they leave? Why don't they believe? Why are they making those choices? Why did they die? Why did God let this happen to me, to us, to them? It doesn't make sense. I need to know, I need to see, I need to do. Heart, eyes, walk. Do you get it? Like, is David getting to you? Like, he sees you. He sees what we're going through. He's gone through it. You look at David's life. You just read the story of his life. He went through so much of this stuff. Unsettling concerns. And it can get messy. It can get complicated. For some of you who are here today, there may have been things that have happened in your lives. Trauma, or abuse, or abusive and toxic families, marriages, or relationships. Things were done to you over which you had no power or control or even choice. And they formed you. And you needed to learn how to get through that. And it often meant finding a way to get control and have some form of power. And then oftentimes it worked. Like you developed strategies, ways to get through, and it got you through. It worked. But then what helped you, what drove you, also became the thing that hindered you. Your anger or your anxiety may be connected to trying to control or finding your hope or your peace and having control. And it's just overwhelming you and it's crushing your soul. If you're here right now and I've just described a little bit of you, maybe you're already going to counseling, but if you're not, I encourage you to. As church, we support that. Like you could even just show up Christian Counseling Center. You say, I'm from his church. And we pay for it. We don't even know who you are. But if you've been through it, maybe you've been starting to unpack some of this. The devastating effects that wanting to have control can have on your life. And what David's saying is that he's been through something, he's been through a crisis, and he's learned that he can only deal what's given him. And he won't get caught up in trying to get round to God's view of things. He's not going to get caught up in things that he can never really see or understand. What David's saying is essentially this: I know that the secret things belong to God. Deuteronomy 29, verse 29, the secret things belong to God. There's things that God is doing that I don't have access to, but he knows what he's doing and they belong to him. But the revealed things, the words of his law, they have been revealed to me. To use the words of Micah, spoken many, many years later, David is essentially saying this to himself, to his own soul: God has told me what is good and what he requires of me, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with my God. He knows the wisdom of Proverbs 19:21. There's many plans in the minds of a man, but it's the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory belongs to the Lord. Proverbs 16:9. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. David knows that he may not be in control of all things, but he knows who is, and he has entrusted himself and all things to God. And he knows the goodness of God, that God is moving the story even when he doesn't understand the story, that the unsettling concerns of life are all in God's hands and that he is in control. Whatever's happening in your life, in your family, your children, your friends, whatever trauma there may be in your story, may all the brokenness, all the sin, all the questions, all the uncertainty point you to the God of David. And may it also point you to his Son, God's Son, Jesus, who asked that question for you as he screamed from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The God who put him there for you and for what you have done and for what has been done to you and for what has been done to this world, for the curse of sin that lies over creation and on us. He sees your story. He knows you. His heart is with you. His eyes are on you, and he walks with you. You don't need to have your heart, your eyes, and your walk up in the things of his, because he condescended to do that for you. His heart, his eyes, his walk. David's come through to the crisis, and he's found a place of peace, a peace to settle his soul. And it comes by this way of just casting all his anxieties and his concerns on the God who is in control. So that's the first thing that we see as we follow David. But we also see a second thing. And it has to do with a sort of a different type of contentment that David has. David is telling God, I didn't simply learn to let go of trying to control. And that's my peace. For some people, that's all they need. It's like, oh yeah, I'm totally controlled by people's opinions of me. Maybe you're sitting here right now and you're like, I have never heard that before. Highly unlikely, but like maybe you're sitting here and you're like, I have never thought of that before. I have been controlled by other people's perceptions of me. I have been controlled by my desire to know the future. And it's like, wow, I'm done. Thanks, I can go home now. Like David's like, no. Like, the end of my journey is not simply knowing that I don't need to hold on and have control, that it's with God. No, he's talking about a peace that can settle his soul. And there's a challenge. When you know that you don't control things, you can kind of go to two extremes, right? And those are kind of typified by two Greek schools of philosophy, Epicureanism and the Stoics. And I think we see that in our culture today. We see that around us, maybe in us. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:32 may have been quoting an Epicurean saying when he said, if Christ hasn't been resurrected, we might as well eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That was actually something that Epicureans would say. There is, we have no control, there's nothing, just enjoy life. Whatever's in front of you, just have pleasure. You just live in the moment, and you want to just get the best out of the moment. The other side is to be a Stoic. The English word that we have for being Stoic, right? It comes from the Greek word for Stoicism. Philosophers, they taught that you needed to control yourself so you wouldn't be impacted by the emotions, that you wouldn't feel all these destructive emotions. And actually, when we read Philippians 4, verse 11, when Paul says, "Now I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content." That word we translate as content was actually a word that was used by the Stoics, and it means self-controlled. So their hope was to be in control of the self. Nothing touches you. Because if something can touch you, if something can unsettle you, that means you don't have control of yourself. In some ways, Buddhism is like that in our culture. We're more familiar with that. If you're here and you're familiar with Buddhism, if you've kind of read that, or if you've hung around with folks who are into, you understand that Buddhists, that the goal is to transcend reality, right? Nothing touches you. You are above it. transcend the reality of the world. You find yourself and you go untouched. But that's not where David goes. He says this, verse 2, "But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me." A weaned child is a child that comes to the point where they're no longer needing their mother. They're no longer being breastfed. They're no longer being nursed. And what that means is they no longer view their mother as a source of food. If you're here and you've had a little brother or sister and they've been nursed, you know that when they're with mom, they want to eat. Their mom's a source of food, and they're restless and they're rooting your leg. They want to be fed. So the mother is someone who gives them something, and that's what they're looking for. But a weaned child is someone who no longer looks at the mother that way. And a weaned child, like a toddler who just wants to sit with mom. The only thing the child wants is to be with mom. That's it. It's like, not mom, give me something. Not mom, I need this. Mom, do this. No, I just am at peace with you. It's such a beautiful picture of a child at peace with their mother. It's a weaned child. And David says that his soul within him is like that. It's a rest that he can have in the presence of God. Now, it doesn't mean that he doesn't do anything, just sits around. No, he works, he fights, he plans, he builds. But he does that contented with a soul that is like a calmed and quieted child in God's presence. That in the middle of the unsettling concerns, the sorrows, the pains, the questions, the uncertainties, that we can come to God. And the biggest thing that we want from God is his presence, to rest in him, knowing that he holds us and that he holds all things. And what does that look like? Like maybe you're here and you're like, oh, that sounds really cool, but what does that actually look like? And how can we have that peace, and how does it work itself out? And perhaps it's helpful if we look at it in contrast with what we see around us. Now, if you look at if you look like a school, kids, if you look at what goes on around you in your classroom, all the teachers are going to be like, what's with all the kids from Ebenezer and Raybould? They're so introspective this week. But if you look at, sort of what goes on in your class, the way relationships work. And by the way, you can do the same thing at a senior citizen's home. You can probably do the same thing in your office. But what you're going to find is there's like an order to stuff, right? You got the queen bees, you got the ones that everybody's kind of looking up to, the ones who kind of run the show. Got their lieutenants, their second in command, their little helpers, kind of like, if you go to Grace Christian School, which is a number of kids for you, use Gaston and LeFou, and if you're here right now and you have no idea what that means, and you've got grandkids at Grace, you will. But it's the musical they're doing. But anyway, it's a play. Nobody's catching that one. Anyway, the whole thing is the guy who's the big deal and his little buddy that's like, hey, you're great. Like we have that dynamic, right? And then you've got kind of people who have different roles in the middle. And then you got the wannabes, right? They want to be involved. They want to be relevant. And there's like this drama. You have this drama at school. You have drama in your, wherever you are, office. Now, there's a way to get through that. And what some sociologists have called it is, one sociologist called it, that kids should be floaters. And I think we see that in our own life. So in other words, there are people that don't get connected to the groups. They just kind of float. They're untouched. Kind of like, and you kind of see it around you, like that too cool for school indifference. Well, nothing gets to me. None of that touches me. Well, what happens when you do that is nobody touches you, but you don't touch anybody else. You leave the system unchanged. You leave everything, all the brokenness stays. You just kind of float through it. And your goal is to not be damaged by it. But the picture that David's painting here, the picture that the gospel paints, is about a peace that deeply is just inside you. There's a way of being that means I can care deeply about the world around me. I can care deeply about my friends, my family, politics, cultural trends. I can feel deeply about all kinds of different things and desire deeply for things and be at peace at the same time because I know God holds it. That my soul within me is like a weaned child with its mother. I'm with God and I operate from that foundation. You know, in Philippians 4:11, when Paul speaks about having control of the self, when he says, I've learned the secret of contentment, that self-control, that word that he uses, is rooted in the presence and power of God. That's the secret of contentment. Because what does it say a few verses later? I can do all things. Not I don't do anything. No, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. That's the peace that David's found. You can live out of who you are in Jesus Christ, resting in the power and goodness and love and grace and wisdom of God. That God has done the unthinkable in saving you. And even though it's confusing and messy, he is there and you are with him. That his heart came here, that his eyes look down, that he walks with us in the muck and the mire of this life, that he who is everything that we might wish we could be, he who could do anything that we might want to do, that he humbled himself and made himself nothing. As Paul says, Philippians 2, he didn't take advantage of his divinity to get him through. He made himself nothing, humbling himself all the way to the cross, even to death on a cross, in ways that are too great and wonderful for me to fully appreciate. He became nothing and humbled himself to death on a cross. When you have that peace, that I can care deeply for everything in the world around me, because I'm rooted in that love of God and the peace that I have with him because of what he did in Jesus. What would it look like to be a friend who had that peace? What would it look like to be a parent who had that peace, that foundation, that groundedness? What would it look like to be an employer, an employee, a son, a daughter? What would it look like to be at the deathbed? What would it look like to be facing your own death? What it can do is, as one person once told me, it can make you feel almost invincible. It doesn't mean that bad stuff doesn't happen to you. It means that you can go into any and every situation knowing that it's going to be okay. I have no idea what God's going to do here. Like, they might die, I might die, this might happen, but I know he's in control and it's going to be okay. Truly okay. You know, if you don't believe in God, if you don't know the peace of God that was with Jesus Christ, you can try and say that, but at the end of the day, when you really break it down, you know it's not true. Like, you could tell yourself it's going to be okay, but it's on what basis can you say that? Just to make you feel better? I would say that the polarization and the violence that we have in our culture right now is a whole bunch of people striving towards a goal on both sides, but doing it without knowing the peace of God, that God holds it all, that I need to do it, and if I don't do it, it's not going to happen, and I got to. And I'm getting angry. But as Christians, we can enter into that space as those who have a peace that has settled our soul. And we can be that faithful presence in our communities, in our families. If you're here right now and you've dealt with trauma and abuse, this is a difficult thing to hear. It's difficult to work through because the suffering that happened to you is so wrong. But may it point you to the cross, to Jesus Christ. He suffered on the cross for the sins of others, suffered by the sins of others, suffered because of what others did to him. That things outside your power were done to you. But he who had the power over all things, let those things happen to him because he loves you. And now he pulls you to himself by his Spirit, and he says, I love you. Follow me. Entrust yourself to me. Some of you are hearing this, but maybe some of you aren't. I invite you by the power of the Spirit and the ministry of the Word to examine your anger, your anxiety, your energy, your indifference, your restlessness, and ask, is my soul like that within me? Do I want it to be? Is this message a joy and a comfort and a relief, or an annoyance that you just want to be over? You will stand before God. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he won't snuff out. But a proud heart that does not know or want to know the peace that can be had in the arms of God through the love of Jesus is not fitted for the embrace of the Father. Do you get that? If you don't long for the embrace right now, why would you want it when you see him? Get used to it. Learn more about it. And then the third thing that we learn from David is that when your restless heart finds rest in his arms, it gives way to proclamation. David's praying to God, but now he turns and he addresses the nation he rules and he speaks to them. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. Because we just kind of wrap this up here, we look at what he's saying here. God has brought me, David's saying, God has brought me to this place and it's beautiful. Even in the suffering and the brokenness and the tears, it's beautiful and it's my hope. May it be yours. Put your hope in him. He's magnificent. May your soul be like a weaned child with its mother. May that peace that settles your soul be yours now and forever. When you experience this, sharing it, proclaiming the gospel of God's love in Jesus Christ is something that naturally happens. It means that you get it, you understand it, and you want to share it. It's not just something cold and impersonal. You've experienced it and your heart's settled into it, and you just like this hope that you have that extends past your present circumstances, past the grave, and into eternity. And you want to share it. And when you think of Jesus on the cross and the empty tomb, sort of the two central things of Christianity, you are entering the story after something has happened. And you look at life from the other side of that something. As Christians, we look at life after Jesus has happened and in anticipation of what he's going to do. The push, the impulse for evangelism, for the mission of the church is this peace and this hope that is so magnificent and wonderful to not share. May that be our prayer for this church, this place. That we, two churches, would be this place that just reverberates with that message of hope, with that peace that transcends understanding, that we're a place of healing, a place of recovery, a place of proclamation, where people can see just the beauty of who God is and the peace that is ours with Jesus. That we would be a place so equipped, so encouraged, so excited about the message for ourselves, for the world, and for the glory of God. May God be pleased to work in your life this peace that transcends understanding. May He be pleased to give you a peace that settles your soul. Amen.